Hello and a very good morning and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha television. You're watching the Breakfast News. I'm Frank Pereira. Here are the latest headlines. Controversial Guru Rampal arrested from his ashram in Hisar after a police raid on his chamber late last night. He's likely to be presented in court today. 5 Indian fishermen on death row in Sri Lanka released after presidential pardon. They've been handed over to the Indian embassy in Colombo. Centre releases draft guidelines on coal block allocations. The first phase of auction bidding for the coal blocks to take place on February 11, 2015. Massive snowstorm dumps 5 feet deep snow and wreaks havoc in northeastern US. 7 people reported dead in upstate New York. And Vishwanathan Anand in a now or never situation as he plays Game 9 today of the World Chess Championship against Magnus Carlsen. Our top focus on the bulletin this morning. Controversial godman Rampal was arrested from his Satlok ashram in Hisar at around 9:30 p.m. late last night after tensions between police and his supporters since Tuesday. He refused to surrender till the end. Police stormed Rampal's chamber and took him away in an ambulance. His supporters tried to resist and allegedly threw acid pouches at the police. The self-proclaimed godman was then taken to a hospital in Panchkula for a medical checkup. He was to be taken to Chandigarh and is likely to be produced before a bench of the Punjab and Haryana High Court today. 5 of Rampal's alleged supporters were detained after they tried to flee the ashram by scaling the wall.
हमारी सरकार की पहली प्राथमिकता ये थी कि जो वहाँ 15,000 से ऊपर लोग फंसे हुए हैं, जिसमें महिलाएं हैं, बच्चे हैं, उन सबको सुरक्षित बाहर निकालना और उसके बाद उस आरोपी को पकड़कर कानून के शिकंजे में बंद करना। दोनों मिशन को ये सरकार कामयाब करने में कामयाब रही और 100% रही।
Well, the self-styled godman had been hiding in the ashram for nearly 2 weeks using women and children as shields. Police say devotees who call themselves Baba's commandos were armed with guns, acid pouches and petrol bombs. 4 women died at the ashram. 1 woman and an 18-month-old baby who were staying at the ashram died in the hospital later. The High Court had ordered Rampal's arrest by Friday after he repeatedly ignored their summons to appear for questioning in a 2006 case involving the killing of a villager by his supporters. He faces charges of sedition or waging war against the nation. Joining me on the phone line is our correspondent Ravindra Sharon now. Ravindra, in fact, this particular Baba or Sant Rampal, as he is famously known in the region, was arrested at around 9:30 p.m. last night. What's likely to happen during the course of the day today? He is expected to be produced before a magistrate. When is he expected to be taken in front of the magistrate?
Yes, Frank, after the arrest of the controversial godman Rampal last night by the Haryana police, he was, in the last night itself, he was taken to the Panchkula Civil Hospital, as we have shown in our report also, for the medical checkup. Let me tell you one thing, this is a very regular medical checkup, which is mentioned in the criminal procedure code that every person who has been arrested should be taken to the medical for his checkup. Later in the day, Rampal is expected that he may be produced in the court, Punjab and Haryana court, at around 10 o'clock. He is wanted by the court in the contempt of court notice. The Punjab and Haryana High Court has issued contempt of court notice. Contempt was made because he jumped the orders which were asked by the court. He was in another case. He was in 2006 murder case.
Right.
Rampal was hello.
Yes, all right, Ravindra Sharon, thank you so much for joining us with that update there, of course. And bring us up to date with the latest as far as that particular case is concerned. Moving on to the other big story now, the Coal Ministry has issued draft coal mine special provisions rules for e-auction of 74 coal blocks. These rules would be placed in the public domain for suggestions till the 24th of this month. The draft comes weeks after the government's ordinance on coal blocks. Here's a detailed report.
New rules and regulations for coal block allocations are expected to be notified by next week. With the Coal Ministry drafting guidelines for allocations, the first phase of auctions could happen as early as February 2015. To ensure transparency, qualified bidders would be asked to put in their financial bids under an electronic auctioning process. The bidding would be open to specified end-use projects in power, steel, iron and cement sectors. In an attempt to avoid monopoly, a cap would be put on the number of blocks a company can bid for.
We are also making an effort to ensure that the blocks are not monopolized by one entity, that they take all the blocks. So the nominated authority will arrive at a particular number. He hasn't arrived as yet, but that work is on.
The biddings will have to be furnished by December 19 and technical process of allotment is expected to be completed by March 3, 2015. Expected aggressive bidding could heighten acquisition costs. The government will take measures to limit the tariff upsurge.
Revenue maximizing approach, it is essential to keep a lid on the tariff. यानी कि जो भी bidding होगी, उसको हम उसमें essentiality रहेगी कि वो उसको pass through ना करें for increasing the tariff.
The Supreme Court had in September cancelled 214 coal blocks allocated since 1993, saying they had been given out in an arbitrary manner. The government moved an ordinance late in October, enabling auctions of some of these blocks. Now, the government proposes to complete the entire process by March 31st, 2015. Kriti Mishra, Rajya Sabha TV.
Joining me for a chat this morning on this very subject is senior journalist Himanshu Vats. Very good morning, Himanshu, and thank you for joining me on the program. What do you make really of the draft norms on coal block allocation? Can we see any kind of changes after, after the stakeholder comments on the 24th of November?
See, these norms are basically to facilitate the auction and, to give clear guidelines on how these auctions would be conducted. So one important point from all this is that, they'll have separate guidelines for power, cement and steel companies. So in power, the coal secretary has said very clearly that the basic intention and the mission is not revenue maximization, not to earn money for the government from these auctions, but to make sure that power tariffs don't rise too much. So that is one important point. Then there are also provisions that, companies, when they're eligible for bidding for a coal mine, the government will see how close they are or how good their end-use plant is.
Yes.
So if that makes companies more eligible, that means those who had operating plants and have lost a mine, they have a better chance to get a mine. So this whole thing is a facilitating thing, guidelines for how to auction the mine, how companies can bid. Very importantly, it also says that they will not allow any monopoly, so that one company can't go and bid many blocks aggressively and sit on them. And the other major point is that even at this stage, the government is open to ideas. It has given time until Monday that if you have any suggestions, give it, and these draft rules will be finalized. So it's a very important step to make sure that auction is completed and blocks are awarded by the middle of March or end of March.
Now, the government has said that it will ensure that the auction itself, doesn't really lead to a hike in power tariffs. Is that realistically possible? How is the government going to ensure that?
See, that's very realistically possible. One way to do that is to have some norms on how much tariff you can charge from power produced from such coal. Now, if there is such a limit, then companies themselves will not bid very aggressively. And also the statement by the coal secretary that the norms would be different for coal blocks being issued to the power sector, steel sector and the cement sector. So which means in the power sector, once they give some guidelines of tariff, which itself will put limits on how much the companies will bid for the block. Or in other words, what the government has made sure is that companies will not bid super aggressively to win these coal blocks, because after that they will not be allowed to charge too much tariff. So how these details are worked out would depend on the main customers, the state utilities and the regulators, the regulatory framework. Once these companies know that they can't pass through the entire cost to the customer, this mission can be achieved very, very easily.
Another important aspect is the timeline, isn't it, Himanshu? I mean, the entire process is expected to be completed before the end of this financial year.
Yeah, that's very important, and I think even in the Supreme Court judgment, there was a mention that certain things have to be done within 6 months. So the timeline is aggressive and it's challenging, and you can see the sense of urgency and hurry. For example, they've given just a few days for people to respond to these draft guidelines and come up with their suggestions. Then there's a very challenging task of collecting the data for the NPV of the blocks. But the government is pretty obviously very determined. The way they came out with the ordinance, there were reports that for around 3 days, many of these officials hardly slept. So this is an aggressive timeline, but they have said it will start by February 11, and by around the 15th of March, they will be able to issue letters of allocation or award of auction. So it's a important timeline. It's quite aggressive,
right,
but I think it is doable, achievable.
All right, Himanshu Vaks, thank you so much for joining us there with those details and putting things into perspective for us as far as the coal block allocation process is concerned. Moving on now, of course, we'll slip into a very short break, but still to come on the show, the centre steps up measures to keep Ebola out, says there's no cause for panic. That and much more. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Back, you're watching Rajya Sabha television. Well, in a major diplomatic victory for New Delhi, Sri Lanka has released the 5 Indian fishermen sentenced to death for alleged drug trafficking. Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapakse commuted their death penalty. The BJP is claiming it as a victory for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his foreign relations.
Frantic diplomatic negotiations and a presidential pardon later, the 5 Indian fishermen who were on death row in Sri Lanka have been released. The 5 will also not be required to serve their sentence in India. The Indian High Commission in Colombo is in the process of working out the exact modalities of their release.
Reports that we are hearing about the release of fishermen are extremely heartwarming. Honorable Prime Minister Shri Modi ji has spoken to the President of Sri Lanka some time ago. The government authorities and the Ministry of External Affairs also have offered to give all kinds of possible help to the fishermen.
The move comes less than a week before the SAARC summit in Nepal. Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapakse and Prime Minister Narendra Modi will both be attending this summit. The 5 fishermen, all hailing from Tamil Nadu, were apprehended in 2011 and sentenced to death by the Colombo High Court on October 30th for alleged drug trafficking. The pardon is being claimed as a big diplomatic victory for India.
Ever since Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has become the Prime Minister of India, one can clearly see that India's voice is taken with respect and heard. And there is a marked change in our diplomatic focus and diplomatic impact.
Now that they are released and the efforts taken by the present Prime Minister, our leader had already congratulated him, thanked him for his efforts. And now we are happy that our Indian fishermen are released.
The Colombo court's ruling had triggered fiery protests in parts of Tamil Nadu and sporadic violence was also reported. India had filed an appeal in the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka against the verdict on November 11th. Rajapaksa and Modi had a telephonic conversation last week on the issue. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi returned to New Delhi early this morning after a 10-day 3-nation tour of Myanmar, Australia and Fiji. Since he left India on November 11th, Modi attended East Asia and the ASEAN-India summits in Myanmar, G20 summit in Australia and held bilateral talks with Australian and Fijian counterparts. He was in Fiji yesterday where he addressed the country's parliament. He also announced a $70 million line of credit for Fiji for a cogeneration power plant besides visa on arrival for Fijians when they come to India. The two countries decided to expand cooperation in areas of defense and security.
We agreed to consult more closely on international issues of mutual interests, including international trade, climate change, United Nations peacekeeping and UN reforms.
Well, a day after a man showing signs of Ebola was quarantined at the Delhi airport, government has stepped up its Ebola vigil. A three-member committee was formed on Wednesday to review Ebola preparedness at airports. The government has also opened a round-the-clock helpline to respond to people's queries on Ebola. Around 30 hospitals across the country are being equipped to treat patients in isolation. Thermal scanners are being used in 18 major airports to detect any traces of fever in passengers, which is usually the first symptom of the Ebola disease. The Health Ministry has also decided to expedite the process to strengthen 10 laboratories by the end of the month for faster screening of samples for Ebola. India is following the Nigerian model of Ebola tracking, which has already been declared Ebola-free by World Health Organization.
इसमें पैनिक करने की जरूरत नहीं है, घबराने की जरूरत नहीं है। यह कोई ऐसा केस नहीं है जो बाई चांस आया। एवरी केस इज बीइंग डिटेक्टेड एंड व्हेन इट इज डिटेक्टेड प्रॉपर एक्शन विल बी टेकन। सभी जगह एयरपोर्ट्स पर 24 एयरपोर्ट्स पर आइसोलेशन सेंटर्स हैं, क्वारंटाइन किया जा रहा है, चेकिंग की जा रही है, डॉक्टर्स को उसके लिए प्रिपेयर्डनेस पूरी की गई है और हर एक स्टेट में भी इसके दृष्टि से जो डॉक्टर्स हैं जो इसको डील करेंगे उनको ट्रेनिंग दी गई है।
Well, let's take a look now at some news-making events planned for the day ahead in our special segment, The Day Ahead. BJP President Amit Shah will begin his election campaign in Jammu and Kashmir today. He will address two rallies, one in Ramban and the other in Banihal this afternoon. He is also likely to release the party's election manifesto for the state. Yesterday, Shah held a meeting with the State Election Management Committee, Campaign Committee and in charges of the election departments in Jammu to review the poll preparedness there. Polling in the first phase will be held on the 25th of November. A three-day Jal Manthan conference begins in New Delhi today. Crucial issues like interlinking of rivers, repair and restoration of water bodies and water management will feature in the meet. Minister Uma Bharti will inaugurate proceedings. Deliberations and consultations will be held with the state irrigation ministers and a range of other stakeholders. About 300 other experts are also expected to attend the conference. The 45th International Film Festival of India begins in Panaji today. Megastar Amitabh Bachchan will inaugurate the 11-day cinematic extravaganza, which will screen 178 foreign films in various categories. INB Minister Arun Jaitley, Defence Minister and former Goa Chief Minister Manohar Parrikar will be present at the inaugural function. Film star Rajnikant will be bestowed the Centenary Award for Indian Film Personality of the Year at today's ceremony. The winter session of Odisha Assembly begins today. It is said to be a stormy session as opposition parties Congress and the BJP are geared up to corner the state government on the multi-crore chit fund and mining scams. The session will continue till the 20th of December. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who is on a 10-day visit to India, will take part in the interactive session on women in leadership in Mumbai today. The session has been organized by the CII and Indian Women Network to promote the cause of women. Maharashtra Rural Development Minister Pankaja Munde will also be part of the session. The Delhi High Court will hear pleas against Shahi Imam Syed Ahmed Bukhari's move to anoint his son as the Naib Imam or Deputy Imam. The centre had informed the Delhi High Court yesterday that the Mughal-era Mosque Jama Masjid is a Waqf property and it has to be decided how to rule of a rule applies on anointment of the new Shahi Imam. The Bombay High Court will hear PILs today seeking action against the Maharashtra Assembly Speaker, Chief Minister and BJP MLAs over the trust vote on the floor of the House. The PILs have been filed against the manner in which the BJP won the trust vote in the Maharashtra Assembly. Moving on to some international news now, a massive snowstorm has wreaked havoc in northeastern United States, leaving 7 people dead in New York. After sweeping across the Great Lakes, the storm dumped 5 feet of snow in the Buffalo area. The situation is set to worsen further as more snow is expected in the next few hours. A state of emergency has been declared in the area. Driving has been banned on many roads. The 225-kilometer stretch of the New York State thruway along Lake Erie and Lake Ontario has been closed. Freezing temperatures were also recorded across all 50 US states, including Florida and Hawaii.
It's going to get, in some ways, worse before it gets better. Don't be deceived. You look out the window today and the sun is shining, and we're using this window of opportunity, but the snow is going to fall once again. So we have further complications ahead.
Well, let's now bring you up to date with the other news-making stories from across the globe in our World Wrap. 4 Afghan Taliban suicide bombers died when a group of the militants tried to storm an international zone in Kabul on Wednesday in the latest high-profile assault aimed at foreign targets in Afghanistan. The attackers tried to break into a complex known as the Green Village, starting with the explosion of a van at the gate of the heavily guarded area in eastern Kabul that houses foreign contractors and various facilities. China and Russia have agreed to conduct naval exercise early next year and strengthen bilateral military cooperation to counter US influence in the Asia-Pacific region. The move brings two potential US adversaries closer. There has been a concerted effort to ramp up the relationship between China and Russia in recent days, focusing on building an Asia-Pacific alliance. Iran and 6 world powers are meeting in Vienna for a week of closed-door talks that aim to reach a historic and comprehensive agreement before a self-imposed deadline expires next week. The talks came at a time only 5 days away from the deadline for the negotiators, Iran and 5 permanent United Nations Security Council members plus Germany to reach a final deal. President Barack Obama will outline a plan on Thursday to relax US immigration policy and grant relief from deportation to nearly 11 million undocumented immigrants in a go-it-alone move that will deepen a partisan divide with Republicans. The White House said Obama will deliver a televised speech laying out the plan. Here's a look now at the global stock markets. US stocks edged lower on Wednesday as minutes from the most recent Federal Reserve meeting gave investors few new clues as to when US interest rates may rise. In the US markets, the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 2.09 points or 0.01% to end the day at 17,685. Standard & Poor's 500 lost 3.08 points or 0.15% to close the business at 2,048. The Nasdaq Composite dropped 26.73 points or 0.57% to finish at 4,675. Gold prices gained modestly by 55 rupees or 0.65% to 26,595 per 10 grams on sustained offtake from stockists and retail consumers amid buoyant overseas cues. Silver prices moved down by 65 rupees or 0.77% at 37,015 per kilogram after a recent sharp rally owing to sluggish industrial buying. Asian stocks mostly fell on Thursday apart from Tokyo, where shares bucked the downward trend and rose in reaction to a further weakening in the yen. Japan's Nikkei is up by 64.10 points or 0.37% to 17,352 at the start of today's trading. Hong Kong's Hang Seng lost 45.37 points or 0.19% to 23,327 at the start of trading, its biggest weekly decline since March. Well, we'll slip into another short break here, but all the sports updates lined up for you on the other side. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Back, you're watching Rajya TV. Let's now get you a roundup of all the sports news from sports arenas across the world in our latest sports beat. With just 4 games to go, former World Chess Champion Vishwanathan Anand is in a now or never situation in the World Chess Championship match against Magnus Carlsen. The two play Game 9 of the 12-game contest today. Anand is under serious pressure to score at least one victory, and if that does not happen in the next 2 games, it might be too late. Chennai FC produced a crushing performance to beat FC Pune City 3-1 as they pipped Atletico de Kolkata to the top spot in the points table of the Indian Super League on Wednesday. Mendoza, Valencia, Bruno Pelissari and JJ Lalpekua scored a goal each as Chennai moved right on top of the table with 16 points. The hero of the match was young Balwant Singh, whose assists were key to 2 of the 3 goals scored by Chennai. Formula One driver Jules Bianchi has been brought out of an artificial coma and arrived back in France on Wednesday, nearly 7 weeks after his near-fatal crash at the Japanese Grand Prix. The 25-year-old Frenchman's family said that the Marussia driver was still listed as critical and that he could remain in a serious way for a long time. And finally, the world's top automakers will unveil new models and prototypes at the Los Angeles Auto Show, kicking off officially this weekend. And here's a sneak media preview ahead of the event. I'm going to leave you with these visuals. Have a nice day.